Welcome back to the Roll Up High Roller community. As always, nothing on the roll up is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this. And finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you. And let's jump in.
Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
Everyone's feeling bullish. Episode 115 of the DeFi by Design podcast. We're here, J. Cole. Yes, we got the rapper himself here today with us, the crypto version, John from Hyperlane. We got Rob. Rob just came off the Pudgy Penguin party. You feeling pudgy, Rob? What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Dude, I feel like I am my Tengu. My Tengu is me. The fun time there. Oh yeah,
I'd be one of my favorite crypto references. That's a good sign if someone's in the know. They know about being your penguin.
Dude, you guys will get on Twitter spaces and just scream, "I am my penguin. My penguin is me," for like 10 minutes straight.
Imagine having a job doing anything else, right? Like I used to work for Wall Street Bank. Like can't go back.
Yeah, it's like you're in a Wall Street Bank. Actually, looks like you're in a nice loft. How'd you?
Yeah.
It looked nice. So I've always dreamed of having a loft for some reason. I don't know why.
what's
You were.
yeah? Go ahead.
No, I was curious. That we got J. Cole in the building. You know, not the rapper. We got a more of a finance savvy John here from Hyperlane. Used to work with Novogratz. What's a crazy story that you got for us that's not confidential to really show the audience what you guys have made of here?
All right. Well, this one I don't think he'd get upset if I told. But so I've worked with Mike for 3 years. Still talk to him fairly frequently. He's a excellent guy, and just it was a blast working with him. And there was a period of time where there's two younger dudes who developed quite a reputation for themselves in the industry as investors, traders, and they start thinking about creating a fund. And of course, right, like Mike likes to back, young folks who are promising. Spend some time talking to them. Then at a certain point, they're in New York. He's like, "Come, let's do dinner at my house." Turns out one of these guys is a combat sports kind of guy. Does a little bit of MMA. He trains. And some point through that conversation, I don't know how they get to it, but this could certainly happen with Mike, because Mike loves wrestling. Like it's a massive passion of his. He's super involved in like the college wrestling organization. And at some point, somehow it gets to like one of these young guys tells Mike Novogratz, like, "You're old. I could take you down." And, it's like a little bravado. He's talking it up. What he doesn't know, Mike's a maniac. Mike has a mat in his house. You can't challenge Mike to, a wrestling match and not expect to actually wrestle. So he's like, "Motherfucker, I got a mat right here. We're going to go right now." And I get a call. So all I know is this dinner is happening. We get a call late at night from an excited Mike. And he's like, "So I had the guys here for dinner." I'm like, "Yeah, how'd it go?" And I'm like thinking, he's excited because he's going to tell me like, "Oh, is it? Well, one of these like tells me the guy and basically challenged me. And he goes, "I whooped his ass in like 30 seconds. He had no chance. He didn't know what he was getting into." And that's still one of my favorite Mike stories. It's absolutely true. That's the reason why I'm like not being giving more details, because like the person is an absolutely wonderful guy, super sharp and brilliant, and had no idea that that's how it was going to go down, right? Like, but that's my favorite Mike story that I could share.
There's the guy with digital culture for you. No wonder they're absolute kings over there. And we got Jake Cole with the husband. He come on.
Yeah, it was a great time. I had I had fun being there.
Was this before he got the Luna tattoo and he was feeling all jacked up and full of energy? He was like, let's go
I
sell.
think it was before. I think it could have been after, but yeah, I don't actually remember.
I mean, that's an easy one to be like, that was the dog of mine. I mean, it's cool tattoo.
Yeah. But yeah, so I've been in crypto for like 6 years now. I got involved really because a buddy from school. At the time I'm working in Morgan Stanley, I'm like a bond trader. And a buddy from school at a birthday party asks me, it's like, yo, John, it's like, this is the spring of 2016. Like, hey, I'm going to put all my money into Ethereum. What do you think? And I'm like, I don't know, dude. I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't know if it's a bad idea. I just don't know. He's like, you want to look into it with me? And I'm like, sure. And we start looking into it. Like, we go back to his house and we end up spending like the next 2 days just going super deep into this. And I'm like, this shit's so fucking cool. I go back to the trading desk Monday morning. I'm like, we ain't going to have a job. We're going to we're all fucked. Like, you don't understand. And just gradually got more and more and more into crypto. And they all thought I was nuts. And then like late 17, early 18, I got my first job. It was a fund called Passport Capital. It was a big macro fund that was getting into crypto. I was their first hire for that. Had a good run there. And give or take 2 years later, joined Galaxy and eventually started co-leading the investment business there with another guy, Michael Jordan, who was a good friend and just one of the sharpest people around. It's genuinely his name.
Yeah, J. Cole and Michael Jordan.
Yeah, he's every bit as impressive as any of the three other famous Michael Jordans. He recently started his own firm called DBA with John Charbonneau. Those guys are definitely worth.
Really?
Yeah.
That guy's Substack's amazing.
Yeah. So he replaced me, one John with another John.
And
Substantially better writer.
now you're at Hyperlane, building the modular.
Then we started Hyperlane, yeah. The Interop specifically for the modular ecosystem. We work a lot with Celestia. We try to have a lot of fun. I'm here to tell you all about it.
Hell yeah. Well, we are some modular maxis ourselves.
So that hurts.
I was giving you trouble because I can't bridge my Kia back. So what a great place to start. This is EDM fanboys are dying to get their hands on some of these precious Chia tokens. Luckily for us, we got Hyperlane giving us some accessibility via Trader Joe and Manta. Trader Joe on Arbitrum and Manta Network. Better liquidity for sure on Trader Joe on Arbitrum. And yeah, I would love to understand, first from like a security perspective, for our community, what the premise of that TIA.N token is, the wrapped TIA token from Hyperlane on Manta or on Arbitrum, kind of how is that secured? And then, yeah, what are the plans to open up a two-way bridge?
Yeah, of course. So actually it is, just to clarify, it is two-way. You just can't do it in one click yet. So if you want to go back, so you can go one click from Celestia directly to Manta or Arbitrum, and the same will be true for any new chains that want to get TIA and get deploy Hyperlane and get added to this. But the way back now is still 2 steps, unfortunately, because it's a slightly separate work stream. I just haven't had the bandwidth to get to it. But if you wanted to get back to Celestia proper, you would go from either Manta or Arbitrum to Newt first, and then IBC transfer over back to Celestia. Right now, the app interface basically abstracts away the need to go from Celestia to Neutron in the first place. It kind of lumps it all into one action for you. Unbundling that on the way back, we still haven't gotten to that. Will change sometime in the next few weeks, but not there yet. To your other question, perhaps a much more important one, is like, how does this should work? Like, what's the security premise here?
Well, how about why am I not being rugged?
Why are you not being exactly right? A very important question. So, unlike other interoperability providers, Hyperlane has a very distinct security setup. So, generally speaking, for the most, I'd say this is probably true to pretty much every major interop protocol that I'm aware of. Security is tightly coupled with the mechanism of like delivering the messages. So whatever is the process by which like a developer uses this protocol to just transfer something, that and how that protocol secures the messages is very tightly coupled. And what that means is like there's usually some enshrined security model, so like in the case of XLR, you have just a super robust validator set. In the case of Wormhole, similarly, you have like the Guardians, some of the most premier, organizations in crypto, just folks that have a lot to lose and obviously are not like in any rush to burn their business by like committing, wormhole fraud. Hyperlane's different. It has a modular security architecture, and it basically decouples the product of connecting chains, the interface for connecting these chains, from the ways of securing that connection. Specifically in Hyperlane, like we care about securing the outbound communication. So like you're sending something from, Arbitrum to anywhere else. We care about securing the message going from Arbitrum. We do that that needs to happen once that message is secured. Anyone can leverage that to receive it somewhere else. So think of it as like something is being broadcasted from the chain. Like you put some security around it, and we'll get in a second into like the different forms that security can take. And now anywhere where you have a Hyperlane mailbox, you can receive that communication. You just have to be comfortable with like whatever was securing it. So it's a really nice property. It means that like once we start, once your chain is supported and someone is running some type of security for that, other chains can connect to your chain without ever having to even talk to you. Like that message is being broadcast and they can just pick it up anywhere else. So specifically for the TIA bridge, right now the TIA bridges, the messages come out of Neutron. And to secure those, we've partnered with the Neutron team. They've been a very active participant in building that Nexus bridge, and they've helped galvanize a nice subset of the broader Neutron validators to secure those messages. So in what we want to get it to is we want to get it to as close as possible to the full validator set on Neutron. And then it basically looks like the same security guarantees as just using Neutron outright. We're going to do the same with Osmosis when Hyperlane launches on Osmosis, probably sometime in the next 4 weeks. Because, again, security isn't prescriptive, we can basically leverage all different forms of security. And so what we like to start with is for chains that have their own validator set, it's so nice to be able to get that same set. Because then as a user, there's no new trust assumption that's added. You're like, when you use a chain, you are explicitly trusting that that validator set is, for lack of a better term, kosher. And so if you could bring that same set of guarantees for interoperability, we really like that. But of course, you're not going to be always able to do that, right? Like sometimes, we're going to be sending messages out of Ethereum, and like we're not going to be able to get every single Ethereum validator, right? There's so many in the current construction of Ethereum that is kind of like, that's an untenable ask. So what do you do? So similarly, you could have these validator subsets. We're also working on activating staking. And so it won't just be reputation based. So you'll have these validators putting dollars on the line. What'll be nice about this is that if you're a chain that wants to use Hyperlane, or even if you're just an app that wants to use Hyperlane between like well-trodden chains, you could incorporate your token into the security of the messages. So you could say, well, these validators need to stake my asset. Maybe you want to bring in another asset, like you want them to stake Lido's version of ETH. You could do that. Cosmos chains could leverage their own assets. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with it. Really what this security architecture lets us do is it lets us bring in any mode of like state attestation or state proof and leverage that to secure things. And because of the more open architecture that we brought to Hyperlane, Like we're even seeing other teams, not the core team, bring security modules to Hyperlane. So Electron, which is an awesome team that's built a ZK Lite client, they wrap that ZK Lite client as a Hyperlane security module. And so where that ZK Lite client is operating, you can now use that instead of any like validator set. There's a few other ZK related things where this is happening as well. So we're very excited about that. But the truth is ZK is still like not something that would fit most people's needs, because the proving time is still a bit long. Like no one wants to wait for, especially small transfers, no one wants to wait like 15, 25, 30 minutes if they don't have to. And so the way we think about this is with Hyperlane, you can actually dynamically route messages based on the contents of the message. So maybe if transactions are of really meaningful size, then you can move to that slower but safer ZK option. And for smaller stuff, just give it to me the fastest, right? What is going to get me here in 30 seconds? Oh, it's this validator option. Let's go with that. So that's high level on like how this is secured, and also gives you a better picture of how anything can be secured for any Hyperlane connection.
Gotcha. From my perspective, it's almost like you just explained more or less in an aggregator of options, which
Yes.
provides. So kind of leading into that, I think that like aggregation of trust is not necessarily always the best case, because even if you have 2 of 3 or 3 of 4, you kind of have problems. In some cases where you can choose the 3 best bridges, but also those, if some of them, or if one of them is a problem, or there's some sort of I guess like collaborative effort to act against the best interest of who's using it, you kind of have some problems there. So you guys tackle this by giving users optionality, from what I understand, as well as are also putting assets at stake to allow protocols to also incentivize, or to incentivize protocols not to have some sort of negative outcome because they have assets at stake. I guess what I'm curious about is like this aggregation. How do you guys tackle the objectivity of which bridges you choose? How do you kind of incentivize them? And the users get to choose, but do you guys pick a subset of what you guys think is the best bridge options, or yeah?
So generally we leave it up. So Hyperlane, we built it to really be we wanted to create something that would be a permissionless option for interoperability. Just like, what is going to be the permissionless layer that anyone can use to connect any chain? And so primarily, like, Hyperlane is actually used by other people. Nexus is the first time where us, in conjunction with the Neutron team, like, we had a goal. We wanted to get TIA into new rollups that are using Celestia. And so that's one where, like, we, together with them operate. And so there we're using, like I mentioned, right, the subset of Neutron validators. There's no real bridge aggregation there. But as a framework, Hyperlane lets you do the bridge aggregation. So one area where this is happening is, I can't mention too much about like the specific project, but it's Neutron related, and they're going to be aggregating a Hyperlane validator set, a Axelar, and Wormhole. And so for those messages to come through for that app, what it means is, like, you're going to need to get the same information from all 3. If that doesn't come through, the messages won't get processed. And so, and then similarly, like, they're not using, this project is using Hyperlane as the main aggregation framework, meaning, like, when their contracts interfaces with something, it interfaces all with Hyperlane contracts, and then routes, using Hyperlane routes to the other bridges. A similar thing was built also by Aave, but Aave used like a little bit more of their own stuff, where for like governance now, for interchain governance, Aave has a proposal up, like the work needs to be implemented. It hasn't been done yet, they have aggregated Hyperlane, Layer 0, and Chainlink. But unlike the other project, they built that aggregation layer themselves because, it's a bigger project. They wanted to sink their teeth into it. And so it's not to tell you that like aggregation is used everywhere where Hyperlane is, but everywhere where Hyperlane exists, the option for aggregation exists.
And the thing that you kind of started off the podcast with is like essentially when we're using these chains, we're trusting that these chains are kosher. Happy Hanukkah, by the way.
And safe too.
So when a project implements Hyperlane, is this like a better way to ask this question is when Hyperlane is aggregating these messaging networks and bridges, are you essentially aggregating like the validators themselves from these networks, and that is kind of like where the messages are pinged across? Because I guess like you mentioned the validators, this is why it's important for validator sets to be decentralized. So how do you think about which validator sets to aggregate as part of Hyperlane?
Right. That's a great question. So generally we try to do like less thinking about that. And first what we did was like build Hyperlane in such a way where like it could integrate with and aggregate any of these. But then you actually need to go ahead and do some work so that the developer that wants to use this aggregation feature is like, they don't need to, do so much by themselves. And so there we did exercise some thinking. And so the first two that we've worked to like have that aggregation feature with were XLR and Wormhole, simply because those sets, while, maybe some people might not think that they're perfect, they're pretty good, right? Like both in terms of chain coverage and the who's actually in the set, right? Like we know everyone who is in the Wormhole Guardians. Those are very reputable, trustworthy people who run like really strong organizations. That set is as good as it gets. The XLR set is an expansion on the Wormhole set. It doesn't have complete overlap, but it has a lot of the same characters. It's larger, generally really strong. And so that's how we thought about like, well, you have to decide what to do first. We decided to do those two first for those reasons. And just like the robustness of those sets. But again, like, one thing is, don't think of Hyperlane as like simply, think of it as a framework for interoperability, not so much as like the fact that it can aggregate, like, is very appealing to some users, but you can also use it kind of standalone where you as the chain, you can operate it yourself. You don't need to depend on anyone else. And so like if you're, an up and comer, just a type of chain that like can't get if you're the type of team that's still small, like you can't get the time of day, you're not hyped yet. And so the other people won't take you seriously. Like Hyperlane's for you. You could just do everything yourself with it. You could leverage your own validator set, any type of security you want. You could run your own relay. And now you can get connected to any other chain that has Hyperlane. And again, you do it in a completely self-sovereign way. Like you ain't got to, and that to me is like, yes, it's not the most active place where Hyperlane is being used because simply there's just not as much usage for those guys by definition. But it's, to me, the most exciting or the thing I enjoy the most is knowing that we give that option to anyone.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was getting at as well. Like, not an aggregation layer doesn't define what Hyperlane is. It's like if I'm a young hungry degen who's trying to get on this modular vibe, and I'm like, oh man, modular narrative, I'm going to the moon. I gotta spin up a modular rollup using Gelato. I gotta use Celestia for my DA. Hate the EVM, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to use Cartesi VM. But I need a interop solution. So what framework do I use? Bang, I can just plug Hyperlane as the framework for my modular rollup. So what does that look like? I am trying to build a modular rollup. I'm choosing, and again, I'm trying to establish this narrative where you need to choose an interop solution as part of your modular stack. It's not just DA, VM, and settlement. It's also interop, and it's even also sequencing, which is kind of being developed as well with shared signatures and decentralized signatures. So what does that look like for, I'm building a modular rollup, I'm choosing Hyperlane as my interop of my stack.
Yeah, that's a great,
to me.
very, very good question. In fact, one of the earlier writings I had sometime this year was just about this notion that like interoperability is a part of the stack. It has become one. And so to talk about modular chains without talking about, permissionless interoperability, especially, is kind of just, it's a dead end. So glad to hear you say that. To really answer your question, let's talk quickly. I'll give like a high level overview. What does it even mean to have Hyperlane on your chain? Like, what do you need? What are the moving pieces? And so to integrate Hyperlane, there are three big things that need to happen. First, there's what we call the mailbox and some assorted contracts. The mailbox does exactly what it sounds like. It sends and receives stuff between chains. It can be implemented pretty much for any VM. It's obviously live for EVM chains. Also exists as CosmWasm. Also in C-level, the Solana VM, and basically near done for Move, thanks to the amazing work by the Movement Labs team. So you want Hyperlane, you want an integration. That means those contracts need to be deployed on that chain you want to be working with. The second thing is we just spent all this time talking about security earlier. In Hyperlane, we have what we call ISMs, or interchain security modules. And these modules can take the form of anything. The simplest one to get set up for like a new chain integration is an authority-based one where you say, hey, here is a validator that looks at the mailbox. We have open sourced all that software, make it very easily inaccessible. All it is truly is, think of it like a bot that looks at the mailbox and then sees, Andy is trying to send something to Robbie's chain. Okay, everything checks out here. If everything checks out, the bot signs off on that. You can have as many validators as you'd like. Each one needs to run the same bot. The nice thing is they don't even need to talk to each other. And so when these signatures are being used, there's not any like interactive element. Rather, it's just each validator on its own looks, signs, and then later on, all of those signatures are taken to the destination by the third piece of a Hyperlane integration. That's the relayer. Also an off-chain bot, also something that we've open sourced and anyone can run for any chain. That relayer basically needs to be able to read the mailboxes that it's connecting between. So it sees, on Andy's chain, I got Andy, he's sending a message. It looks based on the looks of this, I can tell there need to be 3 signatures. I see that there are these 3 signatures here all exist from these 3 different validators. Looks good to me. Now I'm going to try and process this message, meaning I am taking it to the mailbox on Robbie's chain, and I initiate the process function. This is where now we're going to check against those signatures, see that they're valid signatures. This is also where if you'd had any other logic, like, if the message is of this size, do this. If it's that size, do that. If you wanted to, have a certain blacklist for certain addresses, this is all where it all would come in. And we pass through all of that logic. If everything looks good, we arrive at our destination, which would usually be either a EOA or a contract on Robbie's chain. And so we need a mailbox. We need at least one security module. You can use multiple ones. And we need a relayer. Now, to deploy all these, we've created a CLI, so like just a nice command line interface that helps you do all of that. Cool enough is that a company called Kurtosis, which is like a cloud management company where the announcement will be coming out soon, but it's already live. They've actually built, like a hosted environment for Hyperlane where you could run all this stuff on their infra, it's like 2-3 minutes type of thing. Now, do you really need to be able to do it in 2-3 minutes? I don't know, but it's a really, really, really nice tool. Highly recommend checking it out if you're going to be experimenting with Hyperlane. They've done tremendous work. They've made it so smooth. And so that's really what it means. Like, you need to deploy those contracts. You need to operate at least one security mechanism, and you need to run the relayer. Now, more and more, like the core team here at our company, Abacus Works, is happy to provide those second services, right, of like deployment, of helping with validation, helping with relaying. But you don't need to, you could always do it yourself. Even if we were to help in the beginning, we could very easily transition to a mode where, like, again, you retain your sovereignty, you do it yourself. So that's what it means to like integrate it. And then once that's done, you can have nice experience like the Nexus bridge that you used.
Yeah. And so that kind of, from a main chain to a roll up, you have these things called canonical bridges where it's, let's say, for example, in an Arbitrum, it's the optimistic roll up bridge with the 7-day fraud proof. It's the bridge that Arbitrum made themselves. Basically, that is like the bridge with the least amount of trust assumptions. Implementing Hyperlane into your modular roll up, I'm sort of thinking about it in a similar mental model wherein you kind of natively inherit a interop layer that is similar to a canonical bridge, in that you get the level of security from Hyperlane with the mailboxes in the ISM natively embedded into your stack on the rollup that you're creating, and then that allows you to have that kind of native interop embedded without needing to seek out other third-party breach partners or I'll just stop there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Now, what I'll tell you is, yes, that is all true what you said. What in practice, what we've seen is, especially with EVM rollups, is folks still want to use something like the canonical bridge, like a standard rollup bridge for, I think, in Optimism, they call it Portal. I forget what it's called in Orbit and Arbitrum stack. But use that for the gas token, and then use something like Hyperlane for all the other assets. Primary reason is like very few people want to move around the gas token once it's on the chain, right? Like, but stable coins, other assets, something like TIA, you might want to move between different rollups and like send to other places. And so that's we thought too, that people would be like, oh, actually, no, I'll just use this for everything. There are cases where it's being used for everything, but increasingly we're seeing folks being like, well, you know what? For the gas token, let's still have like that optimistic bridge, that 7-day exit game. It's not an asset that people are going to want to transfer generally. So like, fine. But that's what we're seeing in practice. And once you get Hyperlane on your rollup, it's very easy then to, like I mentioned before, have connectivity with any other chain that has Hyperlane. So it's you don't need to then create like these, bi-directional channels for each chain. All you need to is just like make sure that relay you're running is aware of the Hyperlane deployments on the chains you want to connect, and you're off to the races. So in that sense, it's been pretty cool for people who are picking this up now.
Yeah, hence the permissionlessness of it, which is so important, as there's hundreds, if not thousands, of rollups to be seen on the horizon. It is important for those to get connected so that they're not liquidity and users in silos. And I'm curious a little bit more about like the solution itself. Like Andy brought up canonical bridges and kind of like the similarities and differences there. Another communication solution that we're seeing being used to communicate across blockchains is IBC. Like, could you just kind of like quick, like compare and contrast, like what is the similarities? How do you relate to build the perspective of like what Hyperlane is could you kind of like relate it to IBC and talk about where it's similar and where it's different?
For sure. It is, I'd say, like, it's a lot more similar. It's much more similar than not. Think of, you know, the way that I saw it is Hyperlane is very, very, very much heavily inspired by IBC. Some of the people who, you know, helped us build Hyperlane were there to build IBC, right? And most notably in Zaki. So it's fair to say that, like, without IBC, Hyperlane doesn't look the way that it looks today. It was rather that, you know, once you start with something, when you already have the knowledge of, like, okay, what did we learn from IBC? Where does it, like, where are areas where it leaves something to be desired? And where we felt that the most is it provided, like, very good guarantees, but also had some rigidity. It clearly was, we thought, you know, the most elegantly designed protocol. How can we take that design and then just make it much, much more extensible? Now, to make it more extensible, we wanted it to be able to kind of be agnostic to any VM, so that if someone took the time to convert it and make it suitable for a VM, it should generally work out of the box. We wanted something that could, and IBC actually does this too. It just, it's a lot more work to enable, but IBC can support many different security settings. It's not, you know, it doesn't have to be the light client verification. It could accept other modes, but yeah, a lot of work to get it there. So we wanted to make it such that adding a new security setting is considerably easier than it is now than, like, going out and creating, like, new IBC clients. So for us, it's something that is mostly done in contracts with some minor modification, like at the agent level. Because ultimately, right, like the relayer, which is what takes your message, it needs to know what it's reading. So every time you add a new module, like if it does something special with the message contents, there needs to be some relayer modification, but that is pretty light. And so that's really where the big changes are. It's like we tried to make something that's more extensible and less rigid and easier to extend, even in areas where IBC could already extend today. Beyond that, very, very similar protocols. And that's the primary reason why, like, we are not in any way pushing for, like, two IBC chains to use Hyperlane. And, you know, like, it's, you'll even notice, right, like in the bridge that you use, the Nexus, like, we're running IBC between, you know, on the first leg of that transfer, we're just going on over IBC.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it again, it's the notion of kind of going with what is best and kind of the most reputable options. Kind of switching gears a bit, and I appreciate that distinction there, and also the recognition. I think you let the IBC maxis will appreciate that. And even further, kind of diving into the more of the modular subject. Start with, like, a fun question. Like, what part of the stack are you most bullish on for disruption? You know, are you most bullish on EVM or and kind of VMs displacing it, or kind of Ethereum on the DA layer displacing that? Interop is an obvious one. Sequencing, like, what part of the modular stack are you most bullish on?
Oof. Well, you know what? I'll do you different. I'll tell you what now most bearish on, or, like, not bearish, but just the one that I think needs the most work.
Exactly.
Where if that work is done and, like, done well, we're all, like, everyone should be, like, giga bullish, right? And I forget who it was. I think it was Fubar or something. Someone had a great tweet that, like, really not that many people understand, like, hands-on, because not that many teams do it, but, like, something that my team was like, oh yeah, super familiar with this one. Yeah, something like everyone is, like, you know, modular maxi until you try and, like, connect to 17 different RPCs, and, like, oh, only 17? What? That's a low number. It's a rookie numbers. You got to pop up those numbers. But that's probably, like, I'd say right now the biggest problems is there isn't, like, a unified place there's not great coverage for RPCs for all of this. I think some of the folks at Modular Cloud are working on this, and I think their work is very much needed and quite exciting. But something has got to give. This is currently now like the biggest operational sticking point to these connections. It's 9 times out of 10 when we have an issue or where one of our users has an issue, it's RPC related. And so if that part of the stack, this like boring infrastructure, you could say it ties to the VM because obviously like the client that you're using plays a role in how you can extend the RPC. But that part, it's a total fucking mess right now. Very honest.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Like if I have a modular role that's using Movement for VM and Hyperlane for Interop and Celestia for DA, and then I have a separate modular role that's using Avail for DA. It's using a different VM. It's using Fuel VM, and it's using Hyperlane for Interop. And then I've got a third that's using Eigenlayer DA. It's using Solana VM, and it's using Hyperlane for Interop. Do I need 3 separate RPCs for that? Is that what you're saying? I need 3 separate RPCs?
No, not even. So each one of those services needs to consume 1 RPC. What you'll need is a distinct RPC for each one of those rollups. But
so
that is where things get a little like hairy, right? Because you're this chain operator, like either you're building it all yourself or you're using one of the rollup service providers. There's just like everything here is still like pretty nascent. It's kind of like 2018. I remember the folks from Blockdaemon like pitching my team on like, hey, come invest in us. And them saying like, listen, it's imperative that spinning up an Ethereum node is like a 4-click process that you can do it in like a few minutes. If this industry you're betting on like is going to grow, pretty much every app developer, you're all talking about like developers. Well, they're going to need access to nodes. Like they can't get data from the chain without it. They can't do all these things that you think that they're going to be doing. And lo and behold, Alchemy and Fura, Blockdaemon, all of these became really big businesses because their services are so needed, right? Like we depend on QuickNode. But QuickNode, Alchemy, all of these folks right now, when you're, like either they enter this game and kind of create like an on-demand rollup service or service for these rollups, or basically like either they're running the sequencer or something, but someone needs to run a node for your rollup, and then that access to that node needs to be extended through like as a RPC endpoint. And that part is right now, it's the most boring part, but it is the most critical.
Because none of this stuff can even happen without it. So you're just saying like, forget DA, forget VMs. We can't even have a world with all these different modular rollups if we don't have a damn RPC provider who can just very quickly make new RPCs for all these rollups.
Totally.
And then when the right mind is going to add all these RPCs to their freaking MetaMask or Rabby or whomever.
Right. And so that part, that one, like, as I said, like this is the call it like the foundational issue is like an RPC one. And then you have everything else, like it's like adding all of those. And so I think one thing that we're seeing more and more is like where apps can prompt you to make that switch so you don't have to do it yourself. Because like what we were dealing with, a year ago, 2 years ago, where you had to manually add all the RPCs and you had to do the switches every time. Like now where you get many more like prompts to add a new network and it's just like click, prompts to switch and it's just like click. That's a much better state of the world, than just like a year and a half ago. But that can't happen if the fucking rollup doesn't have a reliable RPC
in the first place.
So that is one thing we're like, I'm most bullish on changes in this area because it is foundational. Like when I was an investor, I used to always think like, what's so I'm looking at like this project. They want to do this thing. What's a necessary assumption? What's like a base thing where if that doesn't happen, none of what these people are telling me could even happen? And then like lever up on those like foundational.
On the ones that are needed.
Like 2018, it was pretty clear, like, wait a second. Okay, so we're all super mega bullish crypto, but if there's going to be more crypto than just Bitcoin, then there has to be like these proof of stake networks. It's not all going to just run on, on like proof of work and like these mining operations. Like I was a small time miner and it fucking sucked. I hate mining. I hate everything about it.
There's the Alt L1 thesis right there. That's where you had to pitch.
Yeah. And so then you're like, wait a second. There's no way that crypto is like a $10 trillion industry if this thing doesn't happen. So of course we're going to bet along this line.
Next thing we know, Cardano is in the top 5.
These things been pumping. Apparently Cardano DeFi is popping off. From sleep, guys.
Funny you mentioned it. There's actually a team that built, there is a team that's built, or is building, I should say, Hyperlane to run on Cardano.
I bet there are, and they're going to...
And we can't start, we not that we want to, but even if we just stop them, we could. Yeah. Even if we want
right.
So it's
no power to the people, baby.
Yeah. And so similarly, I think of like, the same for the modular ecosystem, like this, it's...
Well, that's not a sexy answer.
It's not. No, I know. But once you do that, like you incorporate that into all the other bets you're making. Like if that doesn't happen, it's hard to be like mega bullish on anything.
So how do we bet on this side?
You also said that your team has thought a lot about this.
Yeah, there's like a half discussion here, like every other week is like, so when are we pivoting to that thing? Yeah, it's such a fucking issue. Like I'm telling you, if you did like if you collected all the alerts that we get, like all the issues with like a Hyperlane on any chain anywhere, I bet you over 80% are related to like unstable RPCs.
Are the roll-up as a service providers not thinking about this as well? As are
they are absolutely thinking about it, and I think that's one area where like they could start developing an edge. We work with a bunch of them, and like these are very, very sharp people. Everyone who's like in the weeds is aware of this issue. Like this is,
but isn't it like it's a manpower problem, right? It's a data indexing problem, and yet
it's to some extent a manpower problem for sure.
Yeah.
There's also like distributed systems. Like how do we, solve this like with better software? So that's a part of it too. It's obviously not easy to do, but it's if all of this was being done by like a single operator. So like, let's say if you had one company and that one company was going to take in clientele for all of these new rollups. And then like, so imagine a world where there's only two options. Either like you do it all by yourself or like you use this one rollup service provider and they did everything themselves. Then that part is like, that's just straight manpower. Like they know how to do that. That's very easy. It's, there's still like some engineering work to figure out like how to do this completely self-serve at scale. But from our conversations, it doesn't seem like, there's a lot of unknowns there. Like it's stuff that people know how to do. Just someone needs to take the time to do it. And it gets harder the more providers there are because like, anyways.
We need a standard, like a standard base build, Bob the Builder RPC.com.
For sure. But there's that. I'm not an engineer by training, I'm kind of walking jig this. But there's the XKCD comics that the engineers all love. And there's one of them that's really relevant for this. And it's basically for like any type of developer product. And it's like this guy goes, we need a standard for this thing. And you see the two people they're working, and then it's like, we made a new standard. And then the last one is like, now there are 15 standards for this.
Yeah. Welcome to Ethereum standards right there. So, okay. So we're going to place $100 million. We're going to take a loan from the bank and place it all in the next RPC provider. Well, we hit a 100x on that.
You're gonna
Okay, all right. We'll save some of that for
That's right. You gotta
for the next Hyperlane raise. But then once we're done with the RPC bet and it's freaking gone to the moon and we are set for life, you know, we're trying to invest in the modular thesis, the typical stack. Where do you see the most upside in disruption for the typical stack?
I'd say once you've done that, I would have bets lining across the less explored areas of the stack. Like you said, and again, obviously, there's a bias here, but most folks don't think of interoperability as being part of the stack, right? They think of it as a completely like orthogonal thing. You know, at best they think of it as orthogonal, like at worst they don't think about it at all. So definitely feels like this is an underexposed area. And, you know, when you talk about it from like, what's the price of an asset? You know, the price of an asset to me was always something that we viewed as like, how do people think about and feel about this thing today? And like, what's a price change? Price change is in dollar terms, one of two things happening. Either more people changing their mind about the thing, you know, if they like it, then it goes up. If they dislike it, it goes down. Or more dollars. So either more people or more dollars. So sometimes it's both, right? Like more people and more dollars. Sometimes it's the same amount of people, just less dollars, right? But this is basically what's happening. And so if we both agree that, hey, this is an underexposed, underexplored area and people are not connecting it so vividly to the modular thesis, then you can expect that at some point when there will be a price reaction, because clearly like the number of people that feel this way is going to change and the amount of dollars that feel this way is going to change. And you want to be there to benefit from that. So certainly interoperability, one of those areas. But, and I don't know how to capture this part yet, but I reckon that there might be something along the lines of, like maybe it's part of the DA, maybe it is part of like the roll-up framework itself, but like, what's the base thing that lets you even spin up a roll-up? So mechanically, like the RPCs are a part of it, but you know, right now people are using the OP stack. So does that mean like maybe you should get exposed to like optimism because of what the super chain, like that? It's still, you know, there's still a lot of work to do and like fleshing out of that vision, but that is something I also think, because almost no one seems to understand it, I'm pretty sure that's an underexposed area that I'm feeling quite bullish on. And so I'm not telling you like OP, like optimism.
Yeah, no, just in general though.
But just in general, which framework do you think is going to get, which one is going to get the most traction? Like, and then how are they thinking about, you know, value within that sphere? And the superchain, I think, is like the most, you know, and again, even though it still has so much stuff to be figured out about it, it feels right now like the most coherent story around like a framework capturing some value.
Rob, there's only one question here. When token? You know, J. Cole says, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, let the chopper rain. When token Hyperlane, we got to accrue some value in this, up in here.
You know, that's good.
Just wait on the answer.
So I don't know is the answer. We've certainly thought about building one. And I think it's very interesting. Like, you know, I think using it in such a way where you kind of create an alliance or, you know, some type of like affiliation between all of the chains and rollups that are using Hyperlane and all the developers that are powering them, right? Because like, you know, a developer tool is really only as valuable as the developers that use it. And so how do you bring them into the mix? But that's kind of the extent of it. I'm afraid we just haven't had the time to give something like this to what it deserves.
Half jokingly, not was a funny question, and I'd shame you if you spent more time on tokenomics rather than building secure interop for the modular worlds. And Rob, I'd like to dive into that article that we we're perusing through with regards to the restaking as a means for securing interoperability. But I feel like you've got something that you want to ask J. Cole about his previous lyrics that he's fit to us today. And I gotta let's.
My mind was thinking about when we're thinking about these stacks, these deployable stacks that kind of like are able to harness a bunch of developer like brain power. Is it kind of like accurate to think about Hyperlane as like this interoperability stack? Because, we spoke about the modular thesis, and then we also spoke about kind of the aggregation of like these protocols. So it almost has like these inner components, and then it has like this blossoming like permissionless like place where you can plug into it. Is this kind of how you think about like your mental model for interoperability, or do you think of Hyperlane interoperability not really in a stack format, but more in so of like a set of tools? How do you think about it?
That's a very, very good question. We do think of it a little bit more like, I guess, somewhere in between those two, where, like, I guess the only reason I'm avoiding the stack terminology is because we don't want people to think of it as like that there are two separate ones, right? Whereas like, hey, here's the Hyperlane one, and here's the modular one, and like, you can kind of use both. It's like, no, this is, so within each layer, there might be, sub layers, right? So certainly true for the modular stack. And I want to think of Hyperlane, and specifically this concept of permissionless interoperability, as like, you have DA, you have execution, you have settlement, then you have permissionless interoperability. And like, that's the role that Hyperlane plays. Now, within it, yeah, there are, there's levels to this game. And so,
Bars.
Nah, you don't want to separate it, man.
Yeah, exactly. Those things can be thought of as distinct, because
I just think there's going to be just more and more layers being added on. Like, well, end of next year, it's going to be like there's 8 layers to the stack.
I think that's like an evolution, like a maturity of the ecosystem, because as it is able to like evolve, it tends to specialize. So we end up like, there was just monolithic, and it had all of these components that are now modular baked in. It had execution, settlement, everything, DA, all in one stack. Now the industry is able to evolve into a place where it's starting to specialize these different pieces. We're just kind of like getting a clearer picture of each part.
Yeah.
And now they're like plug in, plug out of different parts with one another. You can combine these pieces because now they're standalone. You're able to combine them into different flavors for different use cases.
Yeah, and I think, the big opportunity really will be like, it's the experience when using a rollup that is obviously part of the modular stack. It needs to be on par with like when I just go and I use something like Solana, right? Like, I can't be, and you talked about like, how the fuck am I going to manage all these RPCs? Like, I can't be that. It can't be like, oh, I was going to do this thing, but I guess I want to go to the banana store, but like, fuck, banana store only accepts banana coin. And shit. I'm like, everything in it's just apples. I only got apple coin today. Fuck, what do I do? Like, so I go back home, and then I go get my banana tokens. Like, fuck, I don't want to do that. It needs to be like, I go to the store, I was like, hey, here's the thing, and like, we're done. Because that's how something like any standalone chain works right now. And so what is going to the processes or the technologies by which, like the modular experience can be made seamless is, if you want to be like an area to invest on, like whatever is going to make that happen, maybe it'll be us, maybe it'll be someone else. That to me is like the multi-billion-dollar opportunity, just because like it's foundational. Just like the RPCs bits, that's foundational too. So is this thing. Like without something like that, the modular experience is just not going to be competitive. And
That's the big thing. If you can't compete with Solana, you're done.
Yeah.
Why would
Most
anybody
definitely.
use it?
Exactly. And so that's, it's coming along, right? The modular ecosystem is still very, very new, but I'm pretty excited.
Glad you are. You wrote a great piece about that was you that wrote the piece, right? About the
No, actually, on the ABS thing, no, that was one of
Sorry.
Giga Brains. I'm not that smart. It was York
Giga Brain.
is just an amazing guy who works here.
Mr. Rose. What a great guy that guy is. And he really took his time to take a big steamy poop on ZK Lite clients. So before we jump into why, and perhaps I'm being a little bit over exaggerated here, but could you explain to us, even in for our audience, what is a light client and why are light clients useful in general message passing or just kind of cross-chain interop?
So I guess all we need to know for the context of light clients for messaging is a light client is just so a client or a node is something that allows us to not just run the state to access the state on a given chain, but because we are participating in the active consensus, we have a good sense of like, well, we wouldn't lie to ourselves. So what my client spits out is generally like a true form of the consensus, but that can be quite unpleasant to run, right? Like there's a big lift that's involved there. A light client is just a lighter version of that. Being able to, like this is a gross oversimplification. So people will have to excuse me. But if we had to use like full nodes for everything we wanted to do from an interoperability perspective, that would make the operations of that system very, very difficult. So like, what are we doing when we send a message from one chain to another? We need to get some level of comfort with this state that we are transferring. Like if you want to send something from your chain to Robbie's, then the people on Robbie's chain need to feel good about what you sent over. That like that there is state on Andy's chain that reflects what you want to happen on Robbie's. And so a light client is like one way to get a sneak peek into that state and feel very good about its provenance. Right? Another way is like a group of people, call them validators, tell you this is what happened. It's like, bro, trust me, bro. Like this is, I'm telling you, this is like, it's true. Like this is, I just was on Andy's chain. This is legit. This is the thing that's happening. A light client is a way to do that where you're just basically trusting that the chain's consensus is valid. Now, if you were able to get, if you have like a light client or at the same time you have like a validator system, but it's all the same validators, the people who do the consensus and the people who validate the message are all the same, then effectively like you're ending up with the same result. But that is rarely the case, right? Because like for chains like Ethereum, a massive validator set, it would be very, very difficult to get every single one of them. And so that's why light clients are very useful for messaging, but they're not available everywhere. And this lack of availability, like if light clients were available everywhere, then things like XLR or Hyperlane or Wormhole really wouldn't exist, because something like IBC could just leverage those light clients everywhere, and it would have really taken over just kind of like the entire connectivity landscape. And so part of the impetus to make Hyperlane was like, wait a second, we don't have this technology everywhere. We're probably going to get it more and more and more as there's like a whole move of ZK Lite clients. Still early, but it's happening. And then like, let's build Hyperlane in a way that it could absorb this as it comes on in the future. And then if your chains that already use Hyperlane, like instead of saying, fuck, I got to pick up, ZK Lite client number 33 now instead, and I got to abandon everything we did with Hyperlane. Like with Hyperlane, it's, hey, I was using this security mechanism over here. Now there's a new one over there. I'm just like, point to that one.
Super bullish. Super bullish on Hyperlane. Basically irreplaceable from a interop perspective. And one thing that I'm realizing, and I say that because Susanna Evans from IBC came on a space with a bunch of other interop people, more or less in the EVM modular space, and she was pushing light clients hard. Rob and I also have talked to the Union Build team building ZK light clients from IBC EVM a lot. And so that could be kind of to be able to underpin them, or I guess in the sense, be the layer on top of them and absorb them is super, super bullish. Again, kind of the aggregation thesis. And the other point on the light client thought that I'm having and that I'm realizing with this modular stack is that a lot of this is, rather than sacrificing and creating a trade-off, so with things like light clients and data availability sampling, you're basically not making the trade-off, but you're getting the better effect of lower cost or higher speed without necessarily forgetting that security, just by kind of analyzing a cryptographic amount of proof in the state. You can then, reasonably justify that, hey, this is correct. And so it's not necessarily like a full trade-off. It's like, based on the proof of the code, we can assess this in just, for lack of better understanding, a third of the total, storage, or a third of the total consensus, and spread it out in a randomized order, change it up each time, or however, that kind of works on the tech end, on the cryptography, and then boom, you kind of get the solution without the trade-off. And so I'm starting to understand that a lot of this modular stuff is getting better results by improving the implementation of proving and of like verification without necessarily getting or accepting the trade-off that would typically come with it in a modular stack or in a monolithic stack. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and one thing I haven't gone into it yet, but you wanted to talk a little bit about the restaking piece. Like, from our perspective, like the end game of the restaking work is like, how can we get to a standpoint where, so day one, when we have restaking live, we'll be able to use that to secure everything that goes out from Ethereum. And so if you're a new rollup, you want to connect with Ethereum, you could use Hyperlane and know that what's coming to you from Ethereum is secured by eigenlayer restakers. But how can we take that one step further so that your rollup can actually use it for the stuff it's sending back to Ethereum? And that's going to be not just an engineering challenge, it's also going to be like a little bit of a hearts and minds kind of, because we'll need to convince those restakers that we can create a system that basically tells them like, yeah, you know what, you should put your stuff at risk, like taking, like accepting, messages from like Andy's chain, or, basically staking your assets on the security messages from Andy's chain, because like this will work out for you. Long run, this will work out for you. That's not going to be an easy thing. The engineering,
they're already taking the risks of restaking.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's the end game we'd love to get to.
So is using restaking, is that building on top of the already preset validator networks, light clients, et cetera? Then you add another level of consensus with restaking, or are you suggesting that using restaking for ETH somehow is like a replacement for using these other validator sets, or kind of?
It can be both replacement or supplement. So like one thing. So the nice thing with Hyperlane is like using one security module doesn't mean that you can't use others. And so you could have like, you could use the restaking one, which might be a more expensive option because the restaker's got to get paid. Maybe you only want to use that for really big occasions, right? Say like transfers only of like 5 million and up should go through this, because like, yeah, you want something more secure and you're going to pay up for that. Like we don't know yet what the cost difference will be. Like that marketplace is not yet functioning, but I imagine that market forces will lead to that price landing somewhere. It's probably going to be higher than the price that like your run-of-the-mill validator would want to get paid, because they're putting less at risk in that case. So not necessarily a replacement, but in a lot of places, it will probably act as a replacement for some of the traffic, at least like the higher value traffic.
And in the piece, it said that, and this is kind of general for restaking, in that, by restaking, you then get basically more, call it capital efficiency, call it consensus mechanisms for different AVSs, actively validated services. You get to open up more use cases for your restaked ETH. And then, earlier you kind of mentioned that some of these different chains and different projects using Hyperlane to also put something at stake as well, like Lido, etc. Is the main reason behind utilizing restaking? Is it because this proof of stake model of the incentivization design? Is that why you guys are so bullish on it, or is it a combination of that and security and yield that you can offer people? Or
No, it's more the latter. It's more the former. That part of it is like people feel very good about staked Ethereum as a mode, like providing economic security. Like people generally, like the way people think about economic security is that it's good up until when it's not, right? Like no one would feel good with $1 million securing 100, but they'd feel pretty good with $1 million securing less than $1 million. And so the biggest pool of capital right now available in crypto is, I guess it's technically Bitcoin, but if not, it's the amount of Ethereum stake. And so being able to tap into that just immediately opens you up for the largest pool of economic security. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's like, it's not going to be a slam dunk, because one thing this does not really get thought of when folks think about economic security through restaking is that like it becomes less useful the more people use it. So it has like an inverse network effect. Like as if you're the first one to use it, you're like, this is great. I should pay whatever, like if there's $10 worth of it, maybe I'll pay $1 a year in premiums. But then you come in and you're like, oh, okay, I want it too. Well, what should you pay for it? Because like now both of us are relying on it. So we could have an event, like you could start paying for it. Now we're both paying $1. The restakers fucking stoked. They're taking in $2 of premiums a year, 20% premiums. Their capital base is life's amazing. Then like something happens on my side, and now I just got half of it slashed. You've been paying $2, or so you've been paying $1, same amount as me, and now you're kind of out of luck, right? Because what's happened is that you've paid the same, you didn't do anything, and at the same time, the available budget for you, like the security budget, just got reduced. And so this is like a very interesting dynamic. I don't think we'll actually hit it because I doubt there'll be like many slashing events, but like this is like probably the thing I'm most interested just from like a personal perspective, like seeing how that part of the market develops. But without this, we are not going to be able to tap into this awesomely large pool of economic security, and it's a useful thing to be able to tap into it. And so it's going to happen one way or another.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily on Interop, but since we're on the restaking point, and I realize we're kind of drawing towards time, but this has been like my like sticking point on restaking ever since I kind of like really, I think like caught what was going on with the concept, because my understanding of restaking is basically like these networks are taking out, like essentially they're using security on margin. It's like we're taking the like proof of stake of Ethereum and now we're applying it and we're rehypothecating it to another rollup. And like what happens when there's margin and rehypothecation? It's like you can get margin called. And what happens from the proof of stake underlying the security of your rollup gets liquidated? What happens? What happens to all the other rollups that are also relying on the same pool of collateral to secure their rollup? There's like, because something happens on J. Cole chain to like get like, does that mean something's gonna like affect Andy and Robbie chain? Like these are the like
Those are the hard questions.
what was that?
Those are the hard questions. And it's one like I think the best answers I have for it come from actually like from the bond world, where like you think of just, you know, I think in general, like if you looked at like the credit risk, like Ethereum stakers as a whole, AAA, it's very good. But now some of the things they're going to start securing, they're going to look like triple C's. They're going to look like, really not great companies.
Oh, we know. Don't you worry.
So
These ABS pitch decks, man.
It's there's going to be like, who's going to be the credit agency and who's going to be like, patrolling the beat to make sure that the credit quality of the restaking pool stays AAA. Because that's what generally when people think of it, like from my conversation so far, people do think of this as like, oh, this is a AAA credit that I'm buying here.
But if it's permissionless restaking,
right?
I could.
Well, that's how I don't think
all crap like that on top of that. Then
I don't think restaking can ever be truly permissionless unless like, it'll be permissioned by like some programmatic means where it's like, it's like, oh, we have, like our investment strategy here is not like a person, it's like Renaissance. It runs, it's just the model runs. So like you feed it some inputs and it decides like, yes, this is an acceptable addition or not. But there has to be some type of like permissioning. It might, like the way that it's handed about might not have to be like, oh, well, you have to go to the restaking office and talk to the restaking officer and see if they'll agree to let you restake. But someone's going to have to decide. And like the best way or the most scalable way might be for it to be a machine. But otherwise, I don't know how. And like the current, like I think the Eigenlayer team is very, very adept at this. Like they totally understand it. They have really cool ideas about how to deal with these issues. And that's why, like, you said, like, those pitch decks for those ABSs, like, not everybody gets through.
Goodness gracious, man. Goodness gracious. By the time we have permission restaking, we're going to have AI police. And you're not going to be able to take your dog out for a walk past 9 p.m. So make sure you guys take your dogs out for a walk at night. And thank you so much, J. Cole, for coming on and rapping to us for an hour. It's been a pleasure, man.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.